Invite. Thank you. Hello and welcome everyone to the second of two webinars that the ACRL National Student Engagement Survey Information Literacy Module Review Task Force is hosting. And we have a great lineup of panelists today to address the topic, which is how to talk to institutional assessment about incorporating the IL module in the NSSE administration. And so today we're going to hear from three colleagues across the country. We'll hear from Dr. Chris Bachen, Director of Educational Assessment at Santa Clara University. We'll hear from Dr. Becky Croxton, Head of Strategic Analytics and Special Projects at the University of North Carolina at Charlotte, and Dr. Jillian Kinzie, Associate Director of the Indiana University Center for Post-Secondary Research and the National Survey of Student Engagement Institute. We're going to start, though, with a brief sort of update on the work of the task force to sort of help ground our panelists and you all as an audience about where we are, where we're heading as a group. And so I have on the screen here our charge and the tasks associated with that charge, but it's important to emphasize that this is sort of the third iteration of this task force. And we're just continuing the work of previous groups before us. And so this batch of the task force is really focused on finalizing revisions to the module and getting it up and running, which is the plan for this spring. And so right now our focus is really on outreach related work to the ACRL community. So what have we done so far? We have done a few things. So the questions were revised and piloted during last year's administration in spring 2023. The beta test was analyzed and we made some simple modifications to a few of the questions that were tested and finalized the module to go live this administration. Like I said, this is the second of two webinars. So there was one back in August on what is the NSSE and why does it matter, in particular, the revisions of the IL module questions that is available on ACRL's YouTube channel if you are interested to go back and take a look at that. And here is the second of the two webinars, so thank you all for joining us. And then the big update, like I said, is that the module is ready for schools to use this year. And so we're going to talk about conversations today about how you might encourage that usage on your campus. And so, like I said, the final steps are going to be all about outreach. So we're going to have an opportunity, hopefully, to look at the data over next summer, which is actually related to the last bullet point here about there will likely be another iteration of this task force to continue the work beyond June 2024. And to keep creating educational materials for ACRL on how to use the NSSE module, how to encourage use on your campus, etc. And so I'm the current task force chair and will be through June. So if you have questions about the module or the work of the task force, please don't hesitate to send me a question. My email is there. And then you can see all of the wonderful folks across ACRL and NSSE who have helped us get to where we're at today. So while I'm the one talking to you today, this is the work of many, many folks over the years. So again, any questions, feel free to send them to me and I can help on behalf of the committee, the task force, or find the answer for you. Okay, with that overview, I'm going to turn it over to our panelists. And first up, we've got Dr. Chris Bachen.
Hi there. It's so nice to be with all of you today. And I'm talking about something that is very, very exciting for me. And you can kind of tell it by the way I've showcased the title of the presentation, that I think there are limitless possibilities around partnering between assessment and librarians. And the NSSE provides us one particular opportunity that I think is very exciting. But I'm going to frame my comments a little bit about some other things that are even a little bit broader than that. So here we go. What I think is helpful when, as we make a partnership between assessment and any unit is to just start by remembering who we are, right? And why we might be engaging in a partnership with that other unit. And then we have to decide for ourselves when we're thinking about what we're assessing institutionally, what's important. Is this an undergraduate assessment? Is it for our graduate students? What does it mean that we are, as Santa Clara is a Jesuit university in Silicon Valley? What does it mean to think about the context of WASC or WSCUC as our regional accreditor? So those are things that I kind of think about to start. And then going on to the next slide, we think also about what the university mission and vision and priorities are. And I've jotted down a few of the things that are the Santa Clara mission and vision that are going to contextualize any assessment of student learning really that we are doing. And when it's a outcome as really like big and important as information literacy, we're going to want to think about how the mission of the university comes into play with that outcome. And then also looking at Santa Clara Library's mission and vision, you can see how some of the same things are echoed about lifelong learning, education of the whole person, personal and social responsibility, and the very important emphasis for our university on social justice and helping prepare students who will be leaders and citizens who take part in action for making a more just, equitable, and humane world. So when we think about that with respect to something like information literacy, we're going to want to be thinking about, let's be sure that we talk about the opportunities for working in those social justice elements, and the idea that our students could leave Santa Clara and transfer those critical information literacy skills into other environments in which they'll find themselves. And then when we turn to our accreditor, which is WASC, they have defined 5 core competencies that they expect all institutions to demonstrate students' proficiency at near or at the point of graduation. And you can see those here. And I suspect this is true of most accreditors across the country, that information literacy is specifically called out. And I know that what we've found at Santa Clara is when we're looking at these WASC 5 core competencies, we're often looking at those kind of as in conjunction with one another. So often we might do an assessment that looks at information literacy. At the same time, we're also looking at written communication and critical thinking. So I think that just recognizing that this context, all of these contexts, guide our learning outcomes, our assessment priorities, and even our partnerships. And because all of this that I'm going to emphasize here, it's really about win-win, win-wins for our units, win-win for our students, and for our faculty. Okay, so going on to the next slide. When we think about librarians as partners in assessment of student learning projects, I think that we can see how well assessment offices and librarians share common goals. They also bring overlapping but also unique expertise. And this is where assessment offices definitely can turn to our librarians for their expertise on how we're defining information literacy as a learning outcome, how we can best understand what our librarians are doing in their educational experiences, working with faculty, working with students to help help those students really develop the skills that we want to see. And we both have commitment to continuous improvement. And this is also shared by our faculty. And one of the things that I'd like to emphasize here is how much in my own work, librarians have also been a conduit to faculty. So they are often working independently with faculty on assignment design, on different kinds of projects. And so assessment offices have a lot to learn about what's going on in the classroom indirectly through our librarians as well. And that helps us better plan the assessment projects that we're interested in. Okay, so the next couple slides are about thinking about what's the scope of the assessment project that you might be interested in doing, or that your assessment office is interested in partnering on. And the one that I think we think of first, for sure, is the institutional level assessment. This is so important. Our accreditors are going to want to see evidence of direct assessment. That is, we've looked at actual student work at the point of graduation, and we have determined whether our students have achieved the learning that we have articulated is critical for our graduating students. This is our promise to our students, our promise to them in terms of our education, and we need to make sure that they have done that. And that inevitably means we are putting eyes and rubrics on student work and interpreting the results. And this is where the ACRL framework can come in incredibly usefully to helping frame those learning outcomes, to understanding what assignments the librarians and faculty might be working on together that really would produce quality artifacts of student learning that we can make sure that we're including in the assessments. And I have personally loved when we've been able to bring our librarians in all the way through the finish line, which is not just developing rubrics and whatnot, but also as partners in evaluating the work and interpreting results, and then of course sharing it out to the campus as well. And to supplement that very important direct assessment, also indirect assessment comes into play. I know that when we are doing our institutional learning outcome assessment, we always have at least one source of indirect assessment, that is surveys or focus groups, ways for inviting students to reflect on their own learning. And our librarians can partner in that too, in sometimes in ways of actually helping us administer or participate in the gathering of data, but also in analyzing those results. And then when, of course, we put the indirect assessment together with the direct assessment, we're learning more about why we're getting the results that we are. And this is where the NSSE information literacy module, we haven't used the new one, but we have used the former one, and it was very, very helpful and very meaningful for us as an institution, but also for our librarians and for our faculty. And then if you're really feeling ambitious at the institution level, you can link arms with other institutions and do a multi-campus project with others. And we have, when we share the slides out, you'll be able to click into this. Santa Clara was part of a 4-institution collaboration back in 2015, where we information literacy was just one piece of it. We were mostly focusing on written communication, but we did include that information literacy element, and in a much narrower way than we would want to now. But we did have librarians partnering on that project as well, and we ended up publishing that as well. So that was a really fun, seeing that go out into the world and be able to talk about that project at conferences. Okay, the next slide shows us that some ways of partnering with assessment and librarians also can come into place around initiatives or particular programs. So, for example, library instruction programs are often interested in assessing how well their instruction, their work with students, their work with faculty, how much that's making a difference in the final products of student work. I know that a lot of our library instruction at Santa Clara occurs around our core curriculum courses or disciplinary writing courses that might meet our advanced writing requirement or in capstones. So doing assessments of the work, the collaborative work often that faculty and librarians are doing in very course, program specific, like around this course or these types of courses. This can be a wonderful partnership to see how well are we doing, and perhaps we're trying something different with our intervention. Like, let's say that our librarians have redesigned their instruction module and they want to gather some evidence about how well it's working. We can look to partnering with assessment offices on that, because those efforts are really important kind of in a formative way, not just in a summative way, of helping us see, our university see, and our accreditors see that we are going after opportunities to continuously improve our student learning. We also have launched, and many universities are doing this, campus-wide initiatives to improve information literacy or information literacy critical thinking and written communication. And so we also have engaged in that kind of partnership with a program that we call Swirl at Santa Clara, where we developed essentially a faculty learning community that was a very intensive workshopping of instructional materials and assignments to help improve disciplinary writing. And we were able to embed both direct and indirect assessments. And that's one of the places that we use the NSSE module for the NSSE information literacy module, as well as the written communication module. And then finally, at Santa Clara, we've seen that partnerships between librarians and course instructors have very fruitfully addressed course learning outcomes and innovative teaching methods. And these two can lead to scholarship of teaching and learning publications. So those are important, I think, for the professional development for our faculty and also for our librarians. Okay, now turning to NSSE, what I want to share why these modules have been really valuable for us at Santa Clara. One of the things, especially as we think about information literacy and the writing, is that these modules were developed, as you all know, in conjunction with disciplinary experts. So working together with ACRL, working together with the writing program, the Council of Writing Program Administrators. This ensures that what are guiding our writing programs and our librarians' work are really cutting edge best practices. And I love the fact that NSSE has intentionally partnered with them, because we value that. And that means that these modules are going to be relevant for our campus context. And the second thing that I have appreciated very much about NSSE data is that the modules provide, and the NSSE overall, useful indicators of student practices. They are invaluable for helping us interpret results from direct assessments. And we have used them, as many campuses have, to show the differences. What are the gains over the course of someone who comes in as a first-year student to our institution and then leaves us as a senior? And they also are giving us their take on where the institution has made contributions to their education in particular areas. the modules can be used independently of the entire instrument, or of course, you can tag them on. We've used them both ways. And we have used them in this third bullet as ways to gather baseline information and then rerun the module in order to get a post-intervention indicator of change. And when we have collected this data in conjunction with classes and programs, one of the really beautiful things was that we were able to share the data with the faculty themselves. So we ran basically it was pre-testing the info literacy and written communication module. At the very beginning of the quarter, we shared the results right away with faculty. They could see where their students were at, and then they could really tailor the instruction to those areas where they could see the students didn't have as much experience. And then we were able to run the module at the end of the course, and they were able to look at their gains and know where they could continue to work to make improvements. What was the result of that one course and this was in the case of a beginning student, a first year student, in their writing and their information literacy skills. Okay, and so finally, just want to emphasize again, these are really partnerships waiting to happen. And if you haven't put your toe in the water, just go for it. And I would love to see assessment people reaching out to librarians, but however it happens, put your heads together, because these assessments are really win-win. They lead to more effective learning experiences. They create a shared foundation for trying to implement institutional changes. And they really create ripple effects through multiple levels of the institution. And, really, I just have to say that all of us need to feel energized in our work. And sometimes in assessment, where, one of the ways of thinking about assessment is that it's more compliance driven than genuine inquiry. When you sit and partner with your librarians and you're thinking about why it's so important for students to learn and develop these skills for their lifelong abilities to participate critically in society, it just carries you for the day, and it really motivates why it is that these assessments are so very important. So thanks very much for your time, and I'm happy to talk at any time if you want to connect with me offline. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. And as I begin to turn it over to Dr. Becky Croxton, I will add that as you have questions, please feel free to use the Q&A feature, and we will hopefully have plenty of time at the end to get to them. So with that, I will hand it over to Dr. Croxton.
Thank you. And gosh, Christine, you've just inspired me in so many ways. So what a great kickoff. So I am situated in the library. So I'd like to share a little bit about how I am situated with respect to campus analytics and IR, and then I'll go into a little bit about how I might go about engaging assessment IR folks in conversation, and then how we in our library hope to use information literacy module for improvements. So first I wanted to share a bit about how I'm situated here. I'm the head of library strategic analytics and special projects at UNC Charlotte's library. In my role, I report directly to the library dean. I'm responsible for library assessment, and I'm also leading a campus-wide research project related to student engagement with co-curricular, including the library, and extracurricular services and activities. Thus, I'm in frequent communication and collaboration with our Office of Institutional Research. We are truly partners. We became true collaborators in this work. So each year I compile all of the engagement data at the student level for about 20 campus partners. And so I compile this data, and then I collaborate with our colleagues in institutional research to connect that data with demographics, measures of success, things like retention, GPA, et cetera. And then our institutional research office de-identifies that data and turns it back to me for our own investigations. So we have kind of a two-way conversation going pretty much all year long. So on an annual basis, I provide information to institutional research related to campus IPEDS data, also some specific data that are reported on our campus strategic plan. And then we are sharing our student engagement data set back and forth as we align and bring in the information from our student information system. And similarly, go ahead, next slide, please. I am a colleague and collaborator with our Office of Assessment and Accreditation, which is an arm of institutional research. And each year I provide this office with our library's annual strategic plan reports. And folks from the Assessment and Accreditation Office are also collaborators on the student engagement research study I mentioned above, and are using what we refer to as our student engagement and success data set for their own research and assessment purposes. Once again, we are really collaborative partners in this work. Let's see. And in addition, our assessment and accreditation folks also bring together a campus committee of assessment heads from across campus. We don't, like I and the other assessment folks don't report to assessment and accreditation, but we've really kind of built a community of practice. We use this time to build connections, share information, learn what each other are doing. And so one of my colleagues in that assessment group is the assessment head for student affairs. And her office is actually the one on our campus who is responsible for the administration of the NSSE survey. So all of these interconnections, and we have mutual goals. We're all here for the same purpose, to help students achieve the goals that they want to do. So never think of them as competitors. We are just collaborators. Next slide, please. So when I first started at the university, I actually, this was about 7 years ago, I was a little bit intimidated by the esteemed position of institutional research and assessment and accreditation at our university. But since then, I've really shifted my mindset as I've come to realize that we indeed are colleagues with those common interests and goals that I noted just a minute ago. So the first time our library wanted to dip our hands in researching about student library engagement and its role in student success, our library dean and I actually invited several people for a discussion and brainstorming session about how we might go about this work. So at this meeting, we invited the associate provost, or the person in charge of institutional research, the executive director of the Office of Assessment and Accreditation, the student affairs director of assessment, who is our NSSE administrator, and the director of research compliance, who oversees the IRB, those kinds of things. And so that's where we started. It wasn't, we want this data, can you give us this, etc. It was just like, let's sit down and talk about our mutual goals in the interest of the library to better understand our role in helping students achieve their goals. So where Christine was talking about information literacy as one of the core, I'm sorry, I've lost my word, core things that you want students to learn, ours was about how can the library help students achieve those broader scale goals and help us understand who we're reaching and who we're missing in our work. So anyway, we just sat around the table and together we hatched a plan for how things might work, how we would share information, like personally identifiable information. We needed that information to be able to link things all together. And since then, we've become partners in this work rather than just me asking for information or data time and again. The partners now see the value of this collaboration, and we're now at the point where we're asking we're making some of our data informed decisions in the library and in other places on campus based on findings from this data. For example, through our research, we learned we have a big gap in transfer student engagement with the library. Our university is a high transfer institution. More than 30% of our students are transfer students. And we, based on our research, we know students who engage with the library do better academically. But again, we're missing a lot of transfer students in the way we engage, for example, with our information literacy. You know, we get the first year students in, but we're missing those transfer students. So through this collaborative work with institutional research, assessment, accreditation, and the library and other partners, we were able to make a case for hiring a transfer student librarian that would be focused on connecting with those transfer students. So again, it's not quite related to NSSE, but it's all getting there. So I'll explain that in just a bit. So about how we connected with our NSSE folks, all I did was ask my colleagues, let's see, in student affairs for a meeting. And in that meeting, I asked her some questions about the NSSE survey, how it's administered on our campus, how students are invited to complete the survey, response rates, etc. And also information about topical modules. So we haven't used the information literacy topical module in the past, but we're in this year, so I'm really excited. So I learned that for the past 2 rounds of our NSSE surveys, we did not use any topical modules simply because no one on our campus had asked the NSSE administrator to include those modules. It's just a untapped opportunity, really. Before those past 2 rounds where nobody had used the topical modules, the campus used the advising topical module for a few years. So together, our NSSE administrator colleague and I, we discussed the newly revised information literacy module. I told her a bit about how we would use that information to guide continuous improvement in the library. She did let me know that in general, the campus tends to be pretty cautious and tries not to overburden students with too many surveys and too many questions. But she and I reviewed the module, the NSSE InfoLit module, and together we agreed it would be a great addition to our survey this year. And I also talked with our library dean and our heads of research and instruction, and everyone was on board. And we are giving that module a go this year. And in lieu, most typically, we would run our own library survey every other year, but we're not going to do that. We're just using the information literacy module. We think the gains we can get from that supersede what we would gain from our traditional library survey. And you can see here that the NSSE survey in 2022 had a 27% response rate versus our library survey. The last time we ran, they had a 6% response rate. So our NSSE, they have a little more access to students. You know, that's included in our Canvas, our learning management system. There's more publicity than the library has the ability to leverage. So I think it's going to be a great win for us. Next slide, please. I also think it's a worthwhile exercise to think about how you will use the information you might gain from the information literacy module before moving forward. Those questions are on the NSSE website. You can see them and think about how you might use them before you actually get the data in hand. And I found that using a user stories approach helps me focus my work on impact and the results or actions that we'll take based on findings, not just researching for interest's sake. So often we learn we have access to data. It's like, oh, how interesting. Let's see what we can figure out. But I do think it's a really useful exercise to think about that ahead of time. You don't have to have everything ironed out, but just kind of sit down and work through that. So I like to use a user story approach, which is often used by software developers and designers to answer who, what, and why. So the story is expressed as a simple sentence, the actor, the object, and the explanation. So for example, as a person, the actor, I want to be able to understand or take an action or do something in order to achieve an outcome, solve a problem, or meet a need. So here's an example of how I might use a couple of questions in the information literacy module. So as a librarian, I want to know whether a relationship exists between if a student began college at this institution or elsewhere, those transfer students, and if they attended a campus-sponsored session about conducting research, an instructional session with a librarian, a library or department workshop. Again, that verbiage is coming right from the NSSE survey. So I want to know if our transfer students or first-time in college students have attended information literacy session so that I can tailor the library's marketing and campus outreach services to promote transfer student participation in library instruction and workshops, whether that means working differently with faculty or working differently to reach transfer students. I have one more example on the next slide. So as a librarian, I want to know about graduating seniors and whether a relationship exists between attending a campus-sponsored session about conducting research and whether they decided not to use an information source in a course assignment due to its questionable quality. Again, that verbiage is coming right from one of those questions. And as you librarians in attendance know, discussing, coaching students about whether to use information source and its quality, that's one of the hallmark items we discuss in information literacy. So I want to know if there's this relationship so that I can adjust the library's instructional materials to ensure students are able to determine the credibility of sources and the elements that may temper this credibility. Now, no, chances are you won't need to share these use cases with your Office of Institutional Research or your NSSE administrator. They're probably not going to ask for that, but it may be, just great conversation starters, or, just to have these in your pocket and say, having access to data about these things is really going to help us tailor our instruction and our outreach. That might be the last slide on mine. I can't remember.
It is.
It
So
is.
thank
So
you.
thank you.
Yes, thank you, Becky.
Uh-huh.
And so with that, we're going to turn it over to our third panelist, Dr. Jillian Kinzie, who is joining us from NSSE.
Thank you, Moya. Thank you very much. And thank you, Becky and Chris, for really describing some excellent use examples that are very different to me. Chris's is very much around the outcome that they were trying to understand, the information literacy as a behavior practice and an outcome. And Becky has really done a nice job of kind of lining up this larger assessment enterprise that would allow you to pose some questions about students' behaviors and practices associated with the library. So really two very nice examples. So I'm happy to kind of come in here and just fill in a few more details. So I'll be the detail person here with some very specific information about the modules. And I'll start by just, again, reacquainting you with the kind of the more technical elements of what the modules are about. So now that you've just heard these really enticing, wonderful examples, you might be a little more curious about how you might actually enact this. So topical modules have been around for NSSE for a long time. It is part of our annual administration options. These are short item sets that we've developed over time. I appreciate Chris's attention to how much we partner with organizations that know a lot more about these topics than we do. So we try and really base them in authoritative information, research about the topic, and partner with organizations that really possess the expertise. The ACRL with information literacy, the writing program administrators to examine writing, and so on. So you can kind of see, if you go to our topical module, if you just Google NSSE topical modules, you'll see the entire set that's available, and institutions are that are participating that year can elect up to 2. And we, limit it to 2 just because otherwise students will be very unhappy with this super long survey. So we try and limit it. In fact, we want people to make pretty conscious choices about this. So the first option is free. And then the second one, we want you to at least have to think about it a little bit more. And there is a fee associated with the second one. So that's how it happens. It does allow, the intent is to allow for more focused assessment opportunities. So very much emphasizing a particular topic. And we do change up these modules as needs and topics emerge in higher education. So we've, if you look at the list that I'll show you in a moment, you'll notice that there are some new ones that have emerged. We've typically offered between 8 and 10 sets. We're bumping that to 11 in 2024. And this year we actually have even another option where institution could design their own. That'll be the first time we're offering that. So in the next slide, you'll see the whole list of modules. And one of the questions that was posed to me in advance of this session was kind of what are the trends that we see in the modules? And I thought I would at least present them in kind of their order of popularity. And I think that suggests something about issues that are of concern in higher education. So as a general trend, the more people, more institutions are drawn to academic advising, career and workforce preparation, first-year experiences and senior transitions questions, and mental health and well-being, which is a new one in 2023. Those have been our top 3, and then mental health kind of is bumping out the first year and senior transitions module in 2023 as the most popular. And then you can see it gets a little more specific to very particular, maybe not so always present issues, including civic engagement, experiences with writing, online learning, has a very devoted audience, but it's not everyone. And then the high impact practice module that we added in 2022 has a very specific audience of institutions interested in and concerned about quality in high impact practices like undergraduate research and learning communities, et cetera. The development of transferable skills is one that's very well positioned to speak to students' skills as they're leaving an institution. So again, one that many institutions are interested in, but not as a regular occurrence. Now, I put experiences with information literacy on the bottom, not to indicate its unpopularity, but just to indicate that it's new. And with its update, I think it's a lot more precise and could potentially draw a greater audience. In the past, it was kind of in the middle of the pack with some of these other very specific modules. So the popularity is one thing to keep in mind, but I want to highlight 2 things that Chris actually mentioned and might be of interest to you is both. First, that module choice should be influenced by institutional interest, a problem that you're having on a campus. If advising has been problematized on your campus and you want to explore its effectiveness, then by all means, think about the advising module. If your strategic priority is information literacy and students' accomplishment in writing, then those are 2 better modules for you. So I think there's a lot of things that influence module choice. And as I think Becky illustrated, it's important to be able to make the case for why. What's your interest in this module? The other piece that Chris mentioned was the use of topical modules on a local administration option. And I believe those were the ones that were coming through as a course-based assessment enterprise. And those are available. And I'm putting in the chat right now, if you want to learn a little bit more about that local administration option, that might also be something that you entertain that's very reasonably priced. But of course, that's offset by the fact that it's a do-it-yourself. So you have to do it. The upside is that you can still use the aggregate results as some sort of comparative information. So it doesn't leave you completely on your own, but there's some comparative information. And of course, you get access to these good questions that have been tested and vetted. So I think that might be a viable option, particularly if you're looking at really trying to assess a particular change in information literacy or library practice that is of interest. There might be some ways to localize that administration, and we can talk more about that if people have specific questions. In the next slide, I actually want to talk a little bit more broadly beyond the topical modules. I realize that that is the crux of our conversation today, but I want to remind everyone about the other core survey items that might be of interest to you. And I think Becky probably could speak to this as well. But there are a lot of items that get to other practices that I think are very relevant that could be used as either an outcome measure, like are students who participate in information literacy or library practices more satisfied? So it could be used as an outcome measure that's part of the core survey, or it could help you group students in particular ways based on the practices that they've engaged in, or frankly, who they are by their student identity or the demographic questions like students who live on campus versus those who live off, or as Becky did with transfer students. So I think there are a lot of other core survey items that could help round out your assessment practice. And I'll just show you in the next animation that the what this relates to. So 93 other core survey items, 22 student identity or demographic questions, and that is then broken out into some different engagement indicators, scales, and gains items that might be really useful in a larger assessment project. And I mentioned that satisfaction question that works really well as an outcome. And then if you could start over again, would you choose the same institution, as kind of like the Uber assessment of students kind of feeling like this is a place that they're really satisfied with. So lots of interesting ways to pair with other data. And then in the next slide, I think we heard a little bit of this from both Chris and Becky, but I'll just highlight a few things that struck me. Is I think there are lots of ways that librarians or anyone who's joined on this webinar could support a NSSE survey administration on their campus to help you learn more about the quality of your students' experience. And that's by knowing your institution's survey schedule. It's a 6-week window. You can help promote it. You can help. I love both of these examples of how they have really effectuated good partnerships with their campus project manager. That's what CPM means in our parlance. Academic departments, deans, faculty members, student life units. There are lots of ways that you can partner to help execute and ensure a successful survey administration, and use the library as a space to support promotion. I know I've seen it used in that way, and even supporting incentives with kind of study skill kind of tools that might be really a nice incentive to offer your students, or just to ensure that when students come into the library, they see the posters, they see the fact that NSSE administrations are going on, and then in ways that you can help involve students in some of your survey administration work. The other thing is to be clear about your plans for using data. Again, I think that was very well illustrated in both examples. Knowing how early you'll get data, the more knowledge you have about how this works, the better positioned you'll be to make use of it. Again, Becky's example of knowing kind of what's your intent, what's your user story, what's your data purpose, or even better, if you have some assessment questions you're trying to answer, that's an even better way to start. There is, a lot of data in addition to just what's provided in, for example, the information literacy, and to be thoughtful about how you might take advantage of all that data that comes both at a student identified level, as both an SPSS file and as an Excel file, and how you might add other data to that. And I think Becky probably has a good sense of how to do that as well. Finally, I'll just close up in the last slide here just to indicate this broader expression of institutional partnerships that we've seen work with librarians. I will always say I'm not just pandering, that librarians are some of our best NSSE champions and supporters. And I always look for their support to both promote the survey, but also to help with data interpretation, and to really be people who are able to help champion the broader goals of this work, which is ultimately student engagement and success. So I think there are lots of ways that librarians can be super supportive and helpful. And on the right-hand side, I've gone back to Kevin Fosnack's analysis of the information literacy as a tool, and that might be helpful for you as you continue to advocate for both the information literacy as a topical module or other tools within NSSE. So I'll stop there to make sure we have some time to get some questions and answers, but we'd love to hear from you and what your interests are. So thanks.
Thank you, Jillian. And I'll just add, this article by Kevin is in College and Research Libraries, if anyone is curious to look it up. So we're going to move to the question and answer period. So if you have any questions, I encourage you to put it in the Q&A, and I will help ask our panelists your questions. I don't see any questions yet. So while folks are thinking of the questions, I actually jotted one down that it could apply to everyone, but I actually want to start with Becky, I think. So there's lots of chatter in the chat about SACS SCOC, and I'm also at a SACS school, and so we talk a lot about the fact that they don't require direct student learning assessment as part of accreditation within the library. And so I'm curious if that's ever been a barrier for you when working with institutional assessment about the NSSE module or just assessment data points in general.
Not at all. Our university is a SACS accredited university. We just went through our accreditation or reaffirmation. I can't remember what it was specifically called, but it was a big deal this spring. And I helped prepare the information that the library reported on for standards 11.1, 2, and 3. And even though we did not have to respond to the library's role in direct learning, we did respond to several components about what assessments we had done and how those helped specifically guide improvements in our library, how we've used those assessments. And I would consider data that would come from something like NSSE to be an assessment that we could use to inform our decision making. So there's been no barriers. We have a very collegial relationship with institutional research and NSSE, and it was the Office of Assessment and Accreditation on our campus who facilitated the SACS accreditation process. But you know, if you think about considering NSSE as an assessment that you can use to drive continuous improvement and be able to speak to how you've done that, that would be a real nice fit into the SACS standard. I think it was 11.1. So great question.
All right. Still hoping or waiting for any questions to come in, but I can keep going. So I'll ask Chris you a question. As someone from the institutional assessment space, what is your suggestion for if you're a librarian who's never reached out to a unit like yours to get the conversation started?
Well, I think, again, just pointing out the knowledge about the value of what you're doing in the library. I mean, whether you make the approach from information literacy or, I mean, that was probably how most of our early contacts got going with the library is, that shared common interest that was so important and part of the learning outcomes for our writing classes as well. So it was embedded so many places in the institution. And it was just delightful to know that there could be help for direct assessments on designing rubrics. Here's one example, like right now, the AAC&U or the value rubrics, the AAC&U's value rubrics are, I don't know if people are familiar with those, but there's one on critical thinking, written communication, information literacy. Unless it's changed recently, I took a peek, but it doesn't seem to have been updated to reflect the new ACRL framework. So it would be so helpful if you were in assessment to know from your librarians that that would be one way that if that was under consideration as a rubric to score student work, that would be a place where you might want to add some additional rubric rows. And in fact, there was a publication, I think it was in 2020, where someone did the side-by-side. A couple of scholars did a side-by-side with the value rubric and the ACRL, and then did some modifications, pointed out where there was overlap. That was great to know. Also pointed out where the framework, the new framework went beyond and then added in some additional columns. So without, that kind of expertise, and I'm more aware of this work because of the partnership on our internal swirl project, but I know that I would be so grateful to know about these changes in someone's field. We feel the same way right now about quantitative reasoning, which is another core competency for WASC. And it's like, I want to know everything about what people are thinking and studying and how they're measuring quantitative reasoning, because we're about to embark on a new core. And I absolutely want us to be thinking ahead of the fact that we're going to assess student learning. And if we change how we're defining the types of student learning that we value, then everything has to line up. All the assessments, direct or indirect, need to make a change too. So anyway, I guess, a conversation over coffee would be just a wonderful way to start about what are you working on. And then a lot of assessment people in the institutional offices may not know about all the assessment work that the librarians are doing independently as well. And that could be of tremendous interest to them in addition.
Great, thank you. And we've got one question, which I think we can ask and wrap it up. And I think this is probably best for Jillian. So are there questions that could be connected directly to student retention and success? Our QAP and general ed curriculum do not explicitly address information literacy, so I need to tie it to the other institutional goals.
Great. I think that's a great question. And I think Chris did a nice job of setting it up, how important it is to make sure that whatever you're interested in is connected to institutional priorities. So if that is an institutional priority, then identifying the questions, for example, I put on that slide, sense of belonging is directly related to retention and success. So looking at maybe students who feel they belong and what are their behaviors associated with library work. There could be some ways to make some bigger connections in this way, but there are lots of measures on NSSE that are directly connected to important outcomes like retention. It's probably the most connected goal that is kind of the reason for being of an instrument like NSSE. A student engagement is associated with retention, and that is its raison d'etre is to help institutions really examine all of their students' behaviors that are associated with those outcomes. So no shortage of items that relate. It's more a matter of what's really relevant for your kind of institution. As Chris indicated, with the Jesuit institution and with a particular student population, what is that? And then based on some other assessments that you might do to identify the specific scales and practices that matter most for your students' retention. So I'll stop there, but if someone wants to ask directly or pose a particular institutional challenge my way, I'd be happy to have a conversation.
Thank you. And with that, we're right at time. So I want to take a moment and thank all three of you for joining us and lending your expertise. So thank you, Chris, Becky, Jillian. And one thing I'll add is I'm throwing my email into the chat here as the task force chair. For this NSSE module through ACRL, if you have questions, particularly like that last one, we're hoping to build some resources for librarians to use to apply the module questions to the larger NSSE as well to make the data useful. So that kind of feedback would be really helpful. So once again, thank you, and I hope everyone has a good rest of your day.
Thank you.